A 23-year-old named Stephen Kubacki was attending a college called Hope University in Michigan. It was a small Christian school where he was studying German and history. Stephen was a little more free-spirited than the typical student enrolled at Hope University, which was very conservative. He was a big-time outdoor enthusiast and he loved to go skiing. In February of 1978, which was just months before Stephen was set to graduate, he decided he wanted to go on a solo ski trip around the Lake Michigan area. And so this area was known as the Lake Michigan Triangle. It's also known as just the Michigan Triangle, and it's an awful lot like the Bermuda Triangle, which is in that northern section of the Atlantic Ocean where planes and boats have gone missing over the years kind of inexplicably. Well, the Michigan Triangle is like that. And starting in the late 1800s, there were all these disappearances that started occurring in the Michigan Triangle area. And so Stephen was going to be skiing around the Lake Michigan area, and so he would be in the Michigan Triangle. Now, he had told his friends and his family that he was just going out for a day trip, and Stephen was a very accomplished outdoorsman, excellent cross-country skier, so really no one bats an eye when he decides to go out and, go skiing. No one even thought twice about it. They're like, all right, cool, we'll see you tomorrow. A day after Stephen had left for this ski trip, some snowmobilers were out in the Michigan Triangle area and they spotted a trail of ski tracks that led up to the edge of the lake, where at the edge of the lake were a set of skis and two ski poles. Just stopped abruptly, and they see that this looks like someone might have fallen into the lake. Now, there weren't any clear breaks in the lake itself, but they figured it was worth telling police and to at least let them know in case they're looking for someone who might have gone missing in the area. And so it was around this time that Stephen Kubacki's friends and family started to recognize that he wasn't back yet, and he should have been. And so they end up calling in an official missing persons report because he should have been back. And so the two things happened in tandem. You have the snowmobilers that have found the ski poles and the skis, and you have the missing persons report that's come out for Stephen Kubacki, and immediately they're connected, and this massive search effort is launched with a focus on where those skis and the poles were found. Now, they looked everywhere, but it was like his tracks went right up to the edge of the lake and then just stopped. There weren't any more tracks on the lake. There were no breaks in the lake. There was nothing there. It was like he just suddenly either went into the ground or just vanished somehow. And so as hundreds of people have descended on this area to look for Steve Kubacki, his backpack shows up right next to his skis and ski poles. That was the first place that everybody went, and his backpack wasn't there. And they didn't really even know how to investigate it. It was just this weird phenomenon where all these people are like, I guess it just must have been there the whole time. They just didn't have a good answer for it. And so after a long and very elaborate search, ultimately they had to call it off. And so they told the family and friends that what must have happened is he got out of his skis and put everything down, went onto the lake, and it cracked and he fell in. And so that's what everybody believed. I mean, why wouldn't they? 15 months go by and Stephen's father hears a knocking on the door. And who's at the door? Stephen Kubacki. And when he sees his son, he can't believe it because he believed his son was dead. But Kubacki has no idea, Steve has no idea how much time has passed. He saw a newspaper, Stephen saw a newspaper in his father's house, and it showed that it had been 15 months since he disappeared. He asked his father, like, how can this be? And he told Stephen, you were near Lake Michigan. That's 700 miles away. How did you get here? And Stephen's like, I woke up in a field about 40 miles from here, and I went to, my aunt's house, your sister's house, and she brought me here. And no one had any idea how he got there or why he was in the field in Pittsfield to begin with. In addition, Stephen had on clothes that he didn't recognize. He had a new backpack that had maps and all sorts of kind of like trinkets from different parts of the country. He had been to apparently San Francisco, Sacramento, all over California, to Chicago, to Utah. He's been all over the country, according to the things that are in his backpack. He had $40 in cash, he had new sneakers, new glasses, and he had a t-shirt on from a Wisconsin marathon. It says he was a participant in. And one of the only things that Stephen would say to the media, because he basically swore off the media and he didn't want to give his story to anybody, he just said to one of the news outlets that he felt like he had been doing a lot of running. But other than that, we don't know what he was doing for 15 months, and apparently he doesn't either. In early 2018, Danny Filippidis was a 49-year-old firefighter living in Canada. He had a wife, he had 2 kids, he was happy, healthy, successful. And every year, he and his colleagues at the firehouse would go on a ski trip to New York, where they would go skiing at a mountain called Whiteface. And so on February 7th, 2018, Danny and his 7 colleagues are at Whiteface. They're enjoying themselves. Danny was an avid skier. Like, this is something he really looked forward to, was this annual retreat to Whiteface Mountain. And it was getting to be lunchtime, and his 7 colleagues said, hey, let's go down to the lodge and get a bite to eat. Danny was just having a great time on the mountain, and he was like, you know, I'm gonna just do a couple more runs. I'll meet you guys in about 30 minutes or so. I'm gonna do a couple more runs before lunch. So they go down to the lodge, and Danny continues to do a couple more runs. And so after an hour or so, and Danny still hasn't shown up at the lodge, his 7 colleagues have finished eating, and they're like, you know what? I bet Danny just decided he wanted to skip lunch, and he's probably just fine. And so they end up just going out and skiing the rest of the day. But by the end of the night, when the mountain is starting to shut down, they're all checking their phones for messages from Danny. They haven't gotten anything from him. They haven't seen him. They decide, let's go check out, you know, his room back at the hotel and make sure that he's there. Maybe he got sick and he left, something like that. And the resort was attached to the mountain itself. So they just walked right over to his room. They knocked, he didn't answer, but then they went out back and they found his car, and his car was still there. They went to the front desk, they explained the situation. They ended up going in the room and checking to see if he was in there. He wasn't, but all of his personal belongings are still inside of the room. So Danny, who has not shown up after going skiing for this additional run, clearly hasn't left the mountain because his car's still here, his cash, his passport, everything is in his room, but no one knows where Danny is. And so they launched this massive search for Danny. And I mean, this day it was so crowded at Whiteface. There's so many people there. And also it had snowed a ton before they even started skiing that day. So it would have been very difficult to move very far off the mountain, let's say, if someone wanted to. I mean, just there was too much snow on the ground. So he couldn't have gotten very far. And there were lots of people there that they could interview to say, have you seen this man? They had a picture of him, you know, and no one had seen him. And there was no sign of him. Despite this massive search effort, no one has any idea what happened to him. The authorities call off the search and they tell his loved ones and his friends that, you know, Danny must have succumbed to the elements. That's the only explanation we can give. We can't find him now because the snow's pretty deep. But hopefully when the weather warms up, we'll be able to launch another search and we can recover his body. And so that's the news that's passed to his wife, to his kids, to his friends, and it's just devastating. And then a couple days later, Danny's wife is home, trying to adjust to this awful new normal, and she gets a phone call from a number she doesn't recognize. And she picks it up, and it's a little bit hard to hear, but she immediately recognizes her husband's voice. And she can tell right away that there's something wrong. Like he's not making sense. She's like, Danny, is that you? Is that you? And Danny's like, I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. Where are you? What am I doing? And so she immediately tells him, you have to call the police. You have to call the police. They have to come get you. And finally he agrees and he hangs up. The police receive a phone call from Danny and he doesn't know where he is. He's saying that, you know, my wife told me to call you. I'm very confused. I don't know what's going on. And they ask him to describe where he is. And he starts describing what's around him. And police are able to, you know, eventually pinpoint where he is. And it turns out he was near Sacramento, California, 2,900 miles away from Whiteface Mountain. Even more strangely, when the police go to collect Danny, he's still wearing his ski gear. You know, winter jacket, winter pants, ski boots on. He even still had his goggles on his head. And he has a haircut, he has a fresh haircut, and he has a brand new phone, a brand new iPhone. But he had no money. He had no wallet. He had nothing. He had left all of his belongings in his room. So looking at him like, how did you get a new phone? How did you get a haircut? Why did you get a new haircut? And when you got your haircut, why didn't the person cutting your hair let someone know that a man who's visibly confused wearing ski gear is getting a haircut in here? And so it's just this totally strange mystery that Danny, to this day, and anybody that knows Danny and his friends, the investigators, everybody, no one knows how he got there. How does a guy without a car, without any money, wearing ski gear, go from New York to Sacramento, California, somehow get a haircut and buy a new phone, and then just suddenly come to and be like, oh, that's right, I'm Danny, and I'm gonna call my wife and let her know where I am now. Like, it was just crazy. On the night of January 3rd, 2008, a 21-year-old man named Part Engel had just poured himself a beer and sat down on the couch next to his girlfriend to watch some TV when he heard a knock at the front door of his apartment in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. It was late, around 8 p.m., and Part was not expecting any company, and so before he got up, he looked over at his girlfriend to be like, "Are you expecting anybody?" And she looked at him and kind of shrugged, and so Part just put his beer down and stood up and walked over to the front door to see who was there. And when Part opened up the front door, he was very surprised to see his mother standing there carrying a small duffel bag. So Part's mother lived in Middletown Township, which was located about an hour and a half away from Part's apartment, and while it was not unusual for Part's mom to stay over at Part's apartment, what was unusual is her just showing up unannounced. She never did that. And on top of that, as Part is looking at his mom, he could see clearly she had been crying because her eyeliner was smudged and her face was all puffy. And so Part knew clearly, there must be a problem here. But when he asked his mother, like, "What's going on, Mom?" she wouldn't tell him. She would just say, "I have to stay with you for the night." And then before he or Part's girlfriend could do or say anything, his mom just walked inside, walked down the hallway, went into the guest bedroom, and then shut and locked the door. And so Part and his girlfriend were left looking at each other like, what's going on here? 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., Part was in bed next to his sleeping girlfriend, just staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Part was so anxious about whatever was going on with his mom because where he was staying, his bedroom, was right next door to the guest bedroom where his mom was staying, and so he already knows there's clearly some issue here with his mom, but all night he's been listening to her next door just pacing and crying in this guest bedroom, and he has no idea what's going on. But deep down, Part knew that whatever was going on, it very likely had to do with his father, whose name was Arun Kumar. Part's parents had a complicated relationship. They had immigrated from India decades earlier and had settled in Pennsylvania, where they had 2 kids, Part and Part's sister. Part's father, Arun Kumar, worked as an engineer at Boeing, and Part's mother owned a 7-Eleven franchise. And basically, since arriving in America, the two of them had really come with nothing and had worked their way up to now to where they had a very comfortable life, kind of like the American dream, the house, the white picket fence, the kids, the whole thing. And so Part had always believed that, his parents, as a result of getting through so much hardship together, that they must truly love each other now. I mean, to have gone through all that together, that would certainly make 2 people very close. And for the most part, that actually seemed to have been the case, that his parents just got along great and were a great couple. That is until a couple of years earlier. Arun Kumar had started an affair, and Part's mother had caught him. Now, Arun Kumar said that, this affair meant nothing and he would stop right now, and Part's mother had forgiven him, in order to keep the family together. But despite Part's mom forgiving Arun Kumar, deep down, she just knew she could never actually trust him again. And so she actually wound up enlisting Part's help to basically watch Arun Kumar's behavior. She had Part set up the software that basically spied on Arun Kumar's computer. Through this software, Part's mom could basically watch Arun Kumar's email traffic and all of his internet activity. Now, Part had not felt good about setting up the spy software on his dad's computer. It just felt totally wrong to be getting in between his parents like this. But he just felt like this was the only way Part's mom was ever going to be able to actually move on. And so Part sort of felt like this was his responsibility. This is the way that the family was going to stay together. His mom really just needed that extra layer of transparency on her husband. Otherwise, the family was going to fall apart. But now, as Part lay in his bed, unable to sleep, listening to his mom pace back and forth in the room next door, he began to think to himself, maybe my mom found something using the software on my dad's computer. Maybe Arun Kumar had started another affair, and that was why his mom was now so upset. But just then, Part heard a new noise coming out of his mother's room. At first, it kind of sounded like low murmuring, like his mom was saying something to herself, but then he realized his mom was having a real conversation with somebody on the phone. And since Part couldn't sleep, and he was pretty intrigued about what the heck was going on with his mom to begin with, he decided to basically spy on his mom. So he very quietly got out of his bed, and he walked around to the wall that lined up against his mother's room, and he put his ear to the wall, and he began to listen. And what he heard was far worse than anything he could have imagined.
What he heard his mom saying to whoever she was talking on the phone was that she had discovered that Arun Kumar had taken out $3.6 million in life insurance policies on Part, on his sister, and on his mother. And now Part's mom was saying to whoever she was talking to on the phone that she wasn't even worried about divorce at this point. She was worried about the physical safety of her and her kids. She was worried that her husband was going to kill her and her kids to get this payout. And so not long after saying this, Part's mom hung up the phone and went back to pacing and crying in the room. And Part, meanwhile, has just heard this horrifying news, and he had no idea what to make of it. I mean, he knew his dad was not a good husband, but the idea that his dad would want to hurt his wife or him or his sister just seemed totally impossible. But then, as Part's standing there just kind of processing what he's heard, he began to think back to these recent behavioral changes he noticed in his father that at the time he had kind of chalked up to, maybe my dad's stressed or something. But now, given the context of what his mom was talking about, Part began to wonder if these behavioral changes were a sign of something being terribly wrong with his father. The first change that Part had noticed happened a few weeks earlier. Now, Part's dad was normally a very mild-mannered and calm guy, but a few weeks earlier, he had gotten into this vicious dispute with their next-door neighbor over the property line that ran between their two properties. It was like he was picking a fight with the neighbor or something. And then, a few days after that, one of the bathroom sinks in their house had stopped working, and so Arun Kumar got out his tools and went to go break apart the sink and put it back together again, and because he was an engineer, this was something he did. This was typical behavior. But after breaking apart the sink, basically ripping it all apart and having all the parts on the ground, Part's dad didn't put it back together. He just left all the tools and all the parts just scattered across the bathroom floor. And considering that Arun Kumar was typically incredibly meticulous and organized, and he's this brilliant engineer, to Part, seeing his dad leave this sloppy mess and this unfinished sink, it felt totally off. And so standing there in his bedroom, totally horrified about everything he's heard, and, now kind of second-guessing everything he knew about his dad, who suddenly seemed like this combative, kind of disorganized guy, Part suddenly felt like, I have to learn more here. I have to figure out if my dad really is a threat. So Part quietly left his bedroom and made his way to the kitchen where his laptop was, and he loaded up that software that spied on his dad's computer. And as he began logging into this program, Part was thinking, maybe I'm going to find something that will show that my mom is clearly just overreacting and misinterpreting what she's seeing, that, my dad is not, out to kill us for some insurance payout. But after loading up this program and kind of scanning through some recent activity, Part realized that actually the situation with his dad was way worse than his mom had made out on that call he overheard. He not only found all these multi-million-dollar insurance policies taken out on him, his sister, and his mom, but also he discovered this stash of fraudulent-looking paperwork. There were all these passport photos of his father, but then connected to these photos was a passport application that was using somebody else's name, as if his father was trying to forge paperwork to create a phony passport for himself. And so at this point, Part felt like his mother was certainly not overreacting here, that in fact it really did seem like his father was, preparing to kill his family and collect millions of dollars in insurance money, and then using this, fake passport he was making, he'd be able to flee the country. For the next several days, Part's mom stayed at Part's apartment, but she barely ever left the guest bedroom. And then when she would leave the bedroom, Part would go up to her and try to ask her, hey, what's going on, without giving away how much he knew already. But Part's mom was like, nope, I don't want to talk about it, and she would just go right back in the room, shut and lock the door. And so finally, after several days of this, Part just went to his mom's bedroom door, he knocked on the door until she answered, and then before she could kind of shoo him away, he said, Mom, stop, I know what's going on, I read the emails, and we have to figure out what we're going to do, because our lives literally depend on it. I agree with you, it looks like Dad is going to kill us and then flee the country. And so Part and his mom would talk through all the details of what was found on his computer, and ultimately they would decide that Part would be the one to go to police and tell them what was going on with Arun Kumar. And so the next day, Part went to the police station, with a stack of evidence that he believed would implicate his father, and Part was so nervous about this, he was shaking. But when he talked to an actual police officer, they looked over his evidence and they heard the whole story. But they told him, look, we really can't do anything about this. They told Part that, it's not illegal to take out life insurance policies on your family. And then also the police officer pointed out that in addition to Arun Kumar taking out those policies on his kids and his wife, he had also taken out a policy on himself and made his wife and his kids the beneficiaries of that policy. And so the police officer said, look, this does not look like a murder plot to me. It just looks like your dad is doing something fairly responsible. And then as for the passport application paperwork, where his dad had used a phony name, the police officer said, look, he has not filed this paperwork, and so it's not illegal what he's doing. Anybody can get some paperwork out and fill it in with whatever they want. It becomes illegal if they attempt to actually pass it off and submit the paperwork, and as far as we know, he hasn't done that. So that's weird, but it's not illegal. And so Part had to leave the police station, and he went back to the apartment, and he told his mom what happened, and ultimately they decided that all they could do now was just wait and continue to watch that software that monitored Arun Kumar's computer, and just hope Arun Kumar would do something that was incriminating that they could then bring to the police and say, see, he's trying to kill us, and collect a payout and flee the country. Over the next few days, that Part and his mother every day just constantly checked this software and watched what Arun Kumar was doing on his computer, all they saw was Arun Kumar was using his computer to do work emails and really basic stuff, absolutely nothing incriminating. And in fact, over these few days, Arun Kumar would actually call Part's mom to ask her when she was coming back home again, and she would tell him that basically she was going to stay at Part's place indefinitely, and Arun Kumar did not seem upset or annoyed by this at all. If anything, it just seemed like he was really distracted and wasn't actually listening to Part's mom as she was speaking. And while this did seem kind of suspicious to Part and his mom, that basically Arun Kumar didn't care that his wife wasn't coming home anytime soon, it still wasn't incriminating. And so, Part and his mom decided to just continue looking deeper and deeper into Arun Kumar's computer to see if there was anything that could begin to explain what was really going on here. And sure enough, Part dug deeper and deeper into Arun Kumar's computer, and he did discover something. Part began finding all these emails with people back in India that kind of vaguely indicated that Arun Kumar was involved in a very sketchy deal, like a business deal. Now, again, the emails were incredibly vague, but what was clear in these back and forths in these emails was that it seemed like Arun Kumar had gotten wrapped up with some really shady people, and they were having these really nasty exchanges in these emails about this, deal that Arun Kumar seemed to be involved in. And so Part began to wonder if maybe he and his mom had this all backwards, that he, his mom, and his sister were not the ones actually in danger here, that in fact it was Arun Kumar who was in danger. Maybe because this deal, went south, and these people that he was doing this deal with, maybe they were mad at him, and so perhaps all these life insurance policies and this new fake identity were some sort of move by Arun Kumar to kind of flee the danger he was in. And so obviously, if this was true, this was still a horrible situation for their whole family, but it was markedly better than what Part and his mom had been operating on before, which was, that Arun Kumar was going to kill his whole family. And so pretty quickly, as a result of kind of thinking about this in a new way, Part's mother started feeling a lot better about the whole situation and actually left Part's apartment and went back to the house to go live with Arun Kumar. And Part himself began to think that, maybe this is not as big of a deal as we thought it was. I'm sure my dad will figure out whatever he needs to figure out here to get out of whatever mess he's in. And over the coming days, Part checked in with his mom every single day because now she's living with Arun Kumar, and she said everything was fine. And Part, he continued to check his dad's computer activity, and nothing else really popped up. It was still just the same stuff they had originally found. And so it just kind of seemed like, maybe this really is not as big of a deal as we thought it was. But on the morning of January 20th, 2008, so about 2.5 weeks after Part's mom showed up at his apartment, everything changed. On that morning, Part logged into his computer to check on his dad's computer using that software, because he was still checking it every single day, and the first thing he saw was his dad had sent this email to this woman who Part didn't know, and this woman was certainly not his mother, and in this email, his dad told this person that he had a big contract coming up, and he was going to make a ton of money from it, and then also at the end of this email, he told this woman that he loved her. And so right away, Part's thinking, okay, my dad is obviously having another affair because this is not my mom and he's saying he loves her. And also, what's my dad talking about with this big contract coming up? Is he talking about the insurance policies? Does he expect those to pay out soon, indicating that I, my sister, or my mom might be dead? And then also, the other thing that Part noticed that morning as he's checking through his dad's computer activity is he found another message his dad had sent out recently where he communicated to somebody that his father had died. So Part's grandfather had died. And also in this message, Arun Kumar is telling this person that he's going to go to his dad's funeral alone, that his wife and 2 kids were not invited to this funeral. And so Part's reading this, and he's totally devastated by the fact that his grandfather's dead, and the fact that, he's not being invited to the funeral? But again, he's thinking, oh my gosh, is that because my dad thinks I'm not going to be alive? Is this all connected, between the big contract and the fact that we're not going to be at the funeral? Is this my dad thinking he's going to enact this murder plot soon? Part didn't know, but he felt like he and his mom and his sister were running out of time and he needed to act right now. And so Part got off his computer, he called his mom, and they made a plan. That evening at around 9:15 p.m., Part got in his car and began driving towards his parents' house to go confront his dad. This was the plan he and his mom had come up with. Basically, his mom would stay at Part's apartment, and Part would go and tell his dad, we know about what you're doing, and you gotta stop. And even though Part was totally jacked up on adrenaline as he drove towards the house, he felt like he really had the upper hand going into whatever this confrontation was going to be. Because, number one, Part was showing up totally unannounced at night to his dad's place. His dad's going to be caught off guard when he sees him. And also, Part knew he was much physically bigger than his father. Part was over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds, and so he had the physical angle as well. And so Part really felt confident driving towards the house that he was going to come out the victor in whatever ensued. At around 10:45 p.m., Part finally arrived in front of his parents' house. He parked the car, he got out, he walked up the front steps, and he knocked on the front door. And a couple of seconds later, Arun Kumar came to the door, he opened it up, and he's totally confused to see his son standing there. And then before Arun Kumar could do anything, Part, in his deepest and most authoritative voice, looked at his dad and said, "We need to talk." And then he intentionally bumped into his dad with his shoulder as he walked into the house. And so his dad is standing at the front door, not really sure what's going on. And Part, after taking a few steps in, he abruptly turns around. And so now he's looking back at his dad. And he takes a step forward and gets right in his dad's face and says, I know what you're up to, I know what you've done, and you have a simple choice to make. You can either stop what you're doing and become the family man you're supposed to be, faithful to mom, or I'm going to go to the police and tell them what you're up to, and you're going to go to jail. Either way, whatever you're doing stops right now. And for a moment, Part and Arun Kumar are basically staring at each other in silence, and then Arun Kumar, before Part could stop him, basically ran past Part, passed him down the hallway, and he ran into the master bedroom, disappearing from Part's view. And so Part's turned around, and he wasn't expecting this, and suddenly all that confidence he had going into this confrontation was gone, because he's thinking, oh my goodness, my dad, maybe he's got a weapon in there, I need to get in there and stop him. And so Part, he turns and runs down the hallway, he darts into the bedroom, having no idea what he's going to see inside, but what he sees does catch him off guard. Arun Kumar is just sitting on the bed, doing nothing. He's just staring what looks like at the wall, and Part just stops in the doorway, looks at his dad, and then realizes his dad's not just absently staring at the wall, he's staring into the open bathroom. And in the open bathroom, on the ground, are all those tools left over from where his dad had been working on the sink and then never finished. All these tools are scattered on the ground, including one tool that now Part is realizing his dad is looking directly at. It was a big, heavy metal pipe wrench. And suddenly Part realized, my dad is looking at a weapon, and he's considering whether or not to get that weapon and attack me with it. The next morning, Part's mother pulled up in front of the house that she shared with Arun Kumar, and she walked up the steps, went to the front door, she opened it up, and as soon as she stepped inside, she yelled out, hello, who's here? But there was silence, and immediately she got a bad feeling, but she knew she had to investigate. And so Part's mom began slowly walking down the hallway, the same hallway that Part and his dad had been fighting in the night before. And she went down the hallway and she turned and looked into the master bedroom, and she couldn't believe what she saw. There was blood on the carpets, on the walls. It was a bloodbath, and in the middle of the room was an obvious dead body that was so mutilated and destroyed she couldn't even identify it. And so seconds later, she had run outside and dialed 911. It would take police almost 4 years to finally untangle Arun Kumar's insane web of lies and also make an arrest for the murder that took place inside of that house. And the reason it took nearly 4 years is because nothing in this case was what it looked like. Now, Part and his mother had been correct about a number of things about Arun Kumar. For example, Arun Kumar was having another affair, he had taken out life insurance policies on his whole family, and he was looking to obtain a fake identity. They were also right that Arun Kumar had become embroiled in a very shady deal back in India, but the specifics of that deal were not what Part and Part's mom thought it was. And when Arun Kumar announced in that message that, his father had died and he'd be traveling to India all alone, that his wife and his kids weren't coming, they weren't invited, well, Part and his mom had been correct, that this was a cover, this was an excuse for Arun Kumar to put his big plan into action. And Arun Kumar's big plan did involve murder, and so Part and his mom were right about that aspect of his plan. However, Arun Kumar's target for this murder was not who Part and his mom thought it was. They were not the target. Arun Kumar was going to murder himself. Or more specifically, he was going to pretend to kill himself. That was actually the shady deal he was involved in back in India. He was working with people who could help him fake his own death. And so what he was going to do is go to India, fake his death, and then once he was dead on paper, that would trigger an insurance payout of his own life insurance policy, and that money would go to his wife and his kids, and then Arun Kumar would disappear using his fake identity he would have, along with his mistress, the woman he was having an affair with. That was the person he had sent that email to talking about the big payout. But Part and Part's mom did not know this last critical piece of Arun Kumar's plan. They really believed they were the target of this big plot, that they were going to get killed, and so that's why they felt like they had to act first. So on January 20th, 2008, Part and his mother worked out an alibi for themselves. What they were going to tell people is that at around 8 p.m., Part went and picked up his mother from the house that she shared with Arun Kumar, and the two of them just went back to Part's apartment, and that was it. But in reality, Part never went over and picked his mom up and brought her back to the apartment. Instead, she was at the house with Arun Kumar when Part showed up at 10:45 p.m. to confront Arun Kumar. So it was him and his mom at the house as Part is demanding Arun Kumar come clean and stop what he's doing. And then at some point during this heated argument in the hallway, Arun Kumar turned and ran into the bedroom, and Part chased after him. And Part, he sees Arun Kumar sitting on the edge of the bed, and he thinks his dad is looking at the pipe wrench on the floor in the bathroom, and Part thinks, my dad is about to get that wrench and attack me with it. And so Part just acted first, and he ran and grabbed that wrench, and he beat his father to death with it. And then after leaving his father's unrecognizable, mutilated body just lumped in the middle of the bedroom floor, blood all over the walls, he and his mother just left the house and went back to Part's apartment. And then the next day, Part's mom went back to the house, and she pretended to find Arun Kumar's body, even though she already knew he was in there. And then she called 911 and acted totally beside herself when they showed up, as if she had just happened upon her husband's dead body. But almost 4 years later, when the truth finally came out about this horrible situation, Part and his mother were arrested. Now, both of them absolutely maintained that they genuinely believed their lives were in danger because of Arun Kumar, and they said during that confrontation in the house, Part was only acting in self-defense. He really believed his dad was going to grab that pipe wrench first, and so he had to do it before him, and that's why he killed his dad. But ultimately, Part would plead guilty to manslaughter, and he would be sentenced to 33 months in prison, and Part's mother would plead guilty to conspiracy, and she would be sentenced to 10 months in prison.
Hey there, you looking bright, golden afternoon light catches gold in your hair, makes me wanna stop and stare. Running free through the park, laughter rings past the dark, sharing secrets we hold, love unfolds, the story told. Hey there, don't you know, you and me, we can grow like wildflowers, reaching high underneath the boundless sky. Small steps lead to someplace new, hearts entwined forever true.
So this last story was documented in the official American Ethnology Report from 1897, 1898. Although the story is, well documented in this report, the location is unclear. People have speculated that it's either Ireland, Scotland, or Wales. So just take this with a grain of salt that the location is not known. It's an older story, but it was officially documented in an official report. In 1898, a 12-year-old boy was playing at this river that ran near his house. He was out in the forest, he was playing to this river, and he had a bow and arrow, and he was practicing shooting his bow and arrow. And after a little while, he got bored of his bow and arrow, and he went to the stream itself, and he started to build a little dam in the river to try to catch some fish. And as he's building this thing up, he's down on his knees building up this little dam in the river, he notices someone is walking down the river towards him. And he looks up, and he would describe this person as looking normal, a normal looking stranger. It's a gentleman who shows up, he's wearing a nice suit. He walks over to Wofford, and he apparently just came out of the woods. And he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the boy, he's like, "Oh, I'm making this fish trap." And he's like, "Man, that looks like a lot of work. Like, you should take a break." And the boy's like, "Yeah, I guess I could take a break." And the gentleman just says, "Well, if you want, while you're taking this break, you can come to my house. It's just up past the bend here. My family's there, you can have a meal with us, and then you can come back and you can finish your fish trap." And so, this is a different time. This is the late 1800s, and I'm not suggesting that at the time it was totally cool to go with strangers into weird houses in the forest, but the boy felt compelled to say yes. He didn't want to be rude, and maybe his fear of strangers is less extreme than it is, for us today in 2020. And so he agrees to go with the man. They make their way up past the river into the forest a little bit, and they come up to this cabin. Now, the boy played in the woods here, and he had never seen this house before. But he's not too concerned, because as soon as he gets to the house, this cabin in the woods, he sees that the lights are on, and he hears kids playing inside, and a close family friend of his family's is sitting on the porch talking to one of the other apparently family members of the stranger. And so the boy's put at ease, and he says hi to the family friend, and the family friend, waves back. The boy goes inside, and he sees that this family has a couple of kids roughly his age. They're playing, goofing around. They have dinner, they have this wonderful meal, and the boy Wofford is like, "Man, this is so great." And after the meal, he lays down and falls asleep. He kind of loses track of time. The boy falls asleep at this cabin. And so he wakes up early the next morning, and he feels horrible because he didn't mean to fall asleep, and he didn't tell anyone from his family where he was going. And he's thinking, man, they're going to be so worried about me. And so as he's getting up to leave, the stranger is already awake, the one that had met him down by the river and called him up to the house. And the boy says, "Hey, can you walk me down back to the river?" And the stranger's like, "I can take you part of the way down, sure." So the two of them, they're having small talk, and the boy's thanking the man for his generosity. And so as they're walking, they're passing by an orchard on one side and a cornfield on the other. And it's this beautiful morning, the sun's just coming up, and the boy remembers thinking how beautiful the setting was. But he also was thinking, like, I don't even know where I am right now. And I'm assuming he's walking me back to where I live, but this doesn't look familiar at all. And the stranger stops. They get to almost a junction right at the end of the orchard and of the cornfield. And the stranger tells the boy, Wofford, he says, "Hey, just go straight. You're going to turn down this way, turn back, and you'll be at the river again where we met." And the boy thanks the stranger, and the stranger turns and starts walking back towards his cabin and says, "Hey, good luck, see ya." And the boy starts following the man's directions. And Wofford, as he's walking, following the stranger's directions, he's suddenly curious and turns around to look back at this strange person who had brought him up to the house and then now brought him back. And he's stunned because suddenly the orchard and the cornfield are not there. There is no orchard or cornfield. It's just deep, dark forest. And he's like, what's going on? He turns back and there's a search party, or it looks like a search party, running up to him. Part of the search party is the family friend that he had seen at the house. And the boy's like looking at these people running towards him, like they're running to him. And he recognizes the family friend, and he can tell they're like urgently looking for him. And he felt bad because he knows he slept over through the night. So he's like, "Hey, I'm here. And they're like, "Where have you been?" And the boy turns to the family friend and he's like, "Didn't you tell them I was with you?" And the family friend is like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Yeah, the house with the family." we ate dinner together last night, and the guy, the family friend, is like, I've been looking for you for the past several days. I've been with your family looking for you. You've been gone for 3 days. And the boy is like, what? And as he's describing the kind of general vicinity of where this cabin was, he's kind of pointing back up towards where it was and describing it from where the river was. The family says to him that since you've been missing, we've heard rhythmic drumming non-stop coming from the section of the forest that you just described. We could never pinpoint where it was coming from. And now that you just showed up, the drumming has stopped. And so the kid's terrified, but there's no answers. Pretty creepy. So 3 very strange stories that luckily all of them ended with the person being found again. But it doesn't change the fact that the mystery remains. Where did they go? It's like they left the earth for a couple of days, or in Stephen Kubacki's case, for over a year, and then came back. It was like a glitch in the matrix or something. And so I would love to hear in the comments what you think can possibly explain how these people are disappearing without a trace and then reappearing days, weeks, months, years later, not having any idea how they got there or what had happened to them. How can we possibly reconcile that? And if you like this video and you want to see more videos like this, I would ask you to please gently perform a lobotomy on the like button, and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my other 3 to 4 weekly uploads that I do every week that sound an awful lot like